Caterina, welcome to the podcast. It is lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much.
So maybe I'll let you to quickly introduce yourself before we start.
Fantastic. I'm Caterina Gorni. I'm the managing director and founder of Oaktree Renewables and Renewables. They're both companies involved in owning renewable energy power plants. In particular, we develop renewable energy power plants from scratch, and we bring them to a ready-to-build phase in order then to resell them on the market to investors.
We're going to explore a few interesting topics today because of the nature of the work you've been doing for the past 20 years. I think you've already been focusing on renewable energy projects and more recently entrepreneurship. So these are the two main topics we'll explore a little bit more. So maybe to start with your career a little bit, looking at renewable energy and where you are right now, the managing director of your business, scaling up soon, so ready to move from the startup phase into a scale-up phase. If you look back at your career and think of the key milestones in your career, what have they been? If someone wanted to, follow your footsteps and enter similar career, what would you say have been the key milestones?
Very nice, interesting question. So I think two big milestones have really dominated probably my career journey. First of all, of course, is moving to London. I am Italian by origin, from the north of Italy, from Milan. That's where I started. Moving to another country has been really a very strong decision. I did it for love at that time. Then the love passed, and actually the second milestone was the reason why I decided to stay, which was the discovering of a brand new sector which I fell in love with, which is the renewable energy sector. It was a while ago. The sector was really just literally starting, so it definitely was not the core of interest of any major, I would say, investment environment. And the potential of the sector, the need for something different and new in the energy sector really charmed me. I came from a background that was not really specifically energy related. So I would say that really changed completely the way I decided to go forward in my career. Yeah.
So your background was investment, and then you started focusing specifically on renewable energy.
My focus was consulting for big international organizations. I worked previously when I was based in Italy for the World Bank Group, the International Finance Corporation. We've been helping these organizations in big restructuring processes for previously socially owned groups in Eastern Europe. That's where I started being in touch with a little bit of the energy-related companies, extremely interesting. And then I moved into the private equity business. That's where I started working for a fund into these new projects, new deals relating to renewable energy. That's where I learned a lot of things about a sector that was really literally starting. So certain things didn't really have any track record yet on the table. We needed to find a way of structuring projects that were yet to become, a reality. That was extremely exciting. But also, you learn to really base your decisions on your reasoning more than on standards or really track record of someone who did it before. And I found that extremely exciting. And it was an incredible learning curve. I've been working for this small private equity firm based in London for 7-8 years. And in those 7-8 years, the sector literally started booming. I'm talking about 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10. The whole of Europe in different phases started really investing massively. You had first Germany, then Spain, then Italy, first with the wind energy, then with the solar energy. Solar energy in particular, our project when I was working with private equity was probably the biggest project being built in Sicily in 2008, 2009. It was a very small project actually of 3 megawatts. Now you have the hundreds of megawatt size. but just to give you an idea on the sense of something new that is actually becoming bigger, where you can really give a contribution. It was not just literally pure work. It was probably a more exciting experience. And on top of that, because the fund was not particularly big, I had the possibility to be exposed to a lot of activities. We literally were able to do photocopies up to negotiating big deals. And that's how it developed. At the end, I was able to be exposed to really decision-making deals, really having an idea of a whole wide range of drivers that push you really to create a power plant. Traditionally, when you look at conventional energy, big deals, very big power plants, very long time to develop them. It's not something that a small team of people can even strategically be involved in. And that's, I think, the preciousness of the experience that I had. And that's probably propelled me also, once this chapter of my career finished, to be bold enough to start my own initiative.
So what was the main reason you decided to leave that maybe a little bit safer space working for another business into starting your own venture? What were your main motivators?
Yeah, well, I think my main motivator was the big love still for London and not willing to move, because the business really grew substantially in those years. We were working there. It was really an incredible experience because, we felt we were really riding a wave, and that was very true. The way it started in the early 2000s on the renewable energy and went on, and with that also technologies in renewable energy starting being more mature. We lived on our day-to-day basis the big drop of cost that this technology had, meaning more investment were being injected into the sector. So that was very exciting. So at some point, by growing the company, there was a need to decide where to focus. And Italy at that time, even if the company was very much based in London, Italy was a big market. And there was the option, obviously, to move back there. And frankly, I decided to stay. And that's meant that I needed to look for the next challenge. And the next challenge has been really to think of how to use the experience and put it into something more tangible. Of course, there was the possibility to continue the same path, maybe with another company, which was quite attractive. And there were bigger and bigger companies investing, especially in the UK, because there was a system of incentives that were supporting capital being injected in the sector. But then again, I think the passion and also a little bit of craziness sometimes pushed me really to say, okay, I really believe into this. I really love it. I have ideas. I had also, I have to say, my interpretation of the market, and I felt like I wanted to really to see whether those ideas and those visions of the market were able to be proven. I was very convinced, and I think at the moment I am very satisfied. And what is still now something that really pushes me forward is that as a company, when I started, obviously we started with our own resources, so not particularly capitalized. We really needed to really focus just on ideas and vision of the market. We've been really focusing on our ideas, on developing projects with a certain interpretation of the market in place. We knew that being a small company, we needed to create a competitive advantage for us. And that's probably where the boldness kicked in. We decided that the focus was going to be just on the UK, developing power plant in the UK. I wanted to focus on a single market and analyze the market and provide innovative solutions to the market and create a competitive advantage there, which would allow us then to attract more capital and raise.
So the competitive advantage is specialization in this one specific market.
Yes. And also, I believe that when you start a company and a business, you just really need to have very clear, maybe not too many goals, but very clear goals on which you can deliver possibly as as you can, just to create a track record. I was coming from the sector, so I had an extremely good exposure in the content and the execution of deals and projects, but frankly, I have never been an entrepreneur before. I needed to prove myself on that. And that is actually something that I think everyone has to have to do when they do this switch.
You started Oaktree Renewables, how many years ago now?
Oaktree Renewables, which is the service management company, probably around eight years ago.
So you've been an entrepreneur for 8 years.
For 8 years. And then what we needed to do and we wanted to do is just really to start developing the project. So become also the ownership of the asset, which is a different kind of position, obviously. And created a platform. I say we because I have partners, obviously. And in this platform, we now own 250 megawatts of projects, different stage of development. Some of them are more advanced, some are a little more at the earlier stage. But these 250 megawatts are a sizable pipeline of sites. They're all fully focused on the UK market. And because of that, we are very much focusing in injecting the business model, the innovation, if you want, that we saw and we wanted to develop in the UK market. And particularly when we started with Oaktree Renewables first, and then with P3 Renewables, which is the platform owning the sites, we knew that we had a lot of competitors, actually. There are a lot of developers. There is a lot of capital as well to invest in renewable energy projects. But also we saw that there was actually a very soon-to-be strong limitation to these projects being developed in the UK. And because for us, the most important thing is develop and make as much as project as it is possible. So the goal is always do more project, and more project. We could foresee that very soon we would have had problems in doing it because in the UK, and that was foreseeable already 10, 15 years ago, actually, the grid is a very centralized grid. So this means that it's lacking a lot in flexibility. When you inject renewable energy into the grid, it's a very scattered energy throughout the day, and you cannot project it very well, especially if it is a source coming from wind. With solar, more or less, when there is the sun, you have energy more or less, and when it's night, it's highly likely you don't. But this means that the grid should be able to be flexible enough to switch on, take on board the energy when it is produced, and sometimes there are peaks of energy coming into the grid that are very high, and also to be able to maintain at least the base load, when all this flow of energy lacks. And when the grid is centralized, this is not possible. It creates a lot of problems. So the problem is that basically there was going to be a lot of investment in renewable energy and projects. There was going to be a lot of requests to be connected to the grid, but the grid was not able to accommodate all these projects. We knew that it was going to happen. And also the grid was going to have frequency problems because of the scattered flow of energy in and out. This means for a developer of any sort of energy power plant, not just renewable, but also conventional, not possibility to sell your energy your full generated energy into the grid. So your financial model has a problem. We were foreseeing this, and we then decided that we were going to restructure our assets in a way that were going to be flexible enough to not be completely dependent to the grid. We hybridized the projects. We focused on a technology that allowed us to do that. So our projects are mainly solar. We add a new technology to the solar, which is for energy storage. Energy storage allows us to store the energy that we produce during the day when there is that very big peak of energy that grid cannot accommodate. We store the energy and we can, reuse the energy in the most efficient way, whether it is selling energy during the nighttime, whether it is during the day when the price of energy is higher. And this allows us, to be honest, to also resell the energy maybe local consumer at a much cheaper price than the market. And we have built a pipeline of projects trying to exploit a little bit an alternative way of structuring the asset. For us, this is a sort of a next generation of renewable energy. power plants, they have a component of a grid, of a private grid. That's why we also call them smart grid projects. There is a transitional infrastructural issue grid everywhere. And what we believe we have is a solution, so that it's not just applicable in the UK, we can also adapt it in other markets, and we're already looking at other markets.
So you've managed to solve this problem of old infrastructure that isn't adapted to this new energy ecosystem with many renewable energy generation facilities. So you have a good financial solution for that. How did you solve the challenges of funding? As you said, it's really interesting. You started as a startup. There was a lot of competition. Who are you collaborating with right now, mainly? And how did you solve that funding challenge?
Capital is also very, very much required in our sector, especially if you're a developer. Developer means that you are deploying your resources very early stage in the creation of the asset, when the risk is also a little bit higher than in the rest of the value chain. Once your project is ready to build, meaning has all the permissions, all the contracts aligned, in reality, your risk is substantially low, and this means you can maybe deploy a little bit more capital and so on. So all throughout the value chain of this asset, there are different investment profiles and capital risks. So we are at the beginning. So for us, it's also business which is also very capital intensive, because your asset requires capital for 1 or 2 years before it's most likely going to be ready to build, and it's going to be capable to generate any cash flow. So for us, fundraising is fundamental, always. So we started fundraising once we had the first more established set of projects, because before we are really the original pool of funders and capital provision. We started checking the market to understand what was the best fundraising strategy around 1.5 years ago. We had a different range of options to consider, and one option was to fundraise with a more institutional fundraising. One option was to bring on board maybe another partner to work with us. And the third option was also to start selling some projects at the earliest stage, and so and to co-develop with other funds investing in the sector. So we started checking the market for what was the best solution for us and where we were more attractive, because we were still proposing projects that were slightly different from the more mainstream, we call them plain vanilla renewable energy or solar project. Our solution requires a little bit more work, because we don't provide just a power plant that has a connection to the grid and a permission from the local authority and a contract with the landlord. We go forward. We also provide a contract solution to sell the energy. We sort out the connection solution in different ways. There's a slightly more work to be done. So at the beginning, we found that we needed to make an extra effort to explain what we were doing and on what interpretation of the market this solution was based. And that was very surprising, because we found out that we were amongst the most proactive trying to find a solution that was already tackling a big problem that we could see coming. If you think it takes 2 to 3 years to have a project developed from zero up to operational. So you want to be able to be sure that in 3 years' time, you're not going to have problems, because otherwise you have 3 years of investment, of capital investment, and you get at the 3rd year and the grid tells you, you know what, you're not going to connect this year. You're going to connect in 15 years. Big problem. And this is something that we were seeing coming, and not many were. Actually, that it was absolutely the right direction to go to. I have to say, in the last year or so, we had really a long queue of interested funders in the sector, already active in the sector, but more present on the value chain, so with more capital availability, capable to build the assets and also to operate it in the long term. So that has been really a great confirmation that we have built a competitive advantage, actually.
Your business model is working. There's a topic that we started discussing in our last conversation, which I wanted to explore with you. We talked about the difference between renewable energy and sustainable energy, and you were passionately explaining the difference. So if you could talk a little bit about that, why is it important to differentiate between these two, between renewable and sustainable energy?
Well, I think, allow me to say, this is an opinion, an analysis of someone who comes from renewable energy and maybe more finance background. Well, sustainability is a much wider sector, much wider category. Renewable energy usually is within the sustainability, is a channel to convey sustainability, but not necessarily a renewable energy company is sustainable. Sustainability requires different variables to be considered. I would say the risk in the renewable energy space is that some aspects of sustainability, because you already deal as a core business with renewable energy, are just a little bit overlooked. And I'm having in my mind big, huge power plants, even with renewable energy, that are not really very considerate about the environmental impact. Now, it depends, obviously, country by country, depends on local legislation to local legislation, but sometimes it's about common sense to understand that if you're building a solar site of 200 megawatts in a very small countryside environment, not in the Sahara Desert, the environmental impact is going to be probably much higher, and the benefits that you're going to receive should be a little bit, balanced with the impact that is going to happen. Clearly, there should be a little bit more consideration in terms of legislation on what is to be considered also sustainable. I don't think that at the moment there's not, because as a developer, I can tell you, when we go to planning, so where we have to go through a process to check how much we really are sustainable and respect the environment and all the stakeholders of a project, there is, at least in the UK, a very thorough check of this. But personally, dealing with renewable energy for the last almost 20 years, in my experience, sizing is important to be considered. We in the UK, which is a territory that is not particularly vast, like maybe in the US, I would stick to sizable size of a project. In our case, because we tend also to want to sell energy directly to local consumers, we tend to adapt the size of the power plant also to the local needs, which I think is a sustainable approach to it. But again, I think when we consider sustainability, we need to really consider how the projects really insert into the interest also of all the stakeholders, and really consider all the stakeholders, not just you.
Finally, I wanted to discuss women in entrepreneurship. It's another topic that we talked about earlier, and there are a lot of statistics that talk about how still there are way less women entrepreneurs, women setting up new organizations, and women driving, scaling up organizations. I think those one of the statistics I've been reading recently was saying that 2 out of every 5 early stage entrepreneurs are women. That's for early stage, and we discussed how probably only 20% of women are involved in scale-ups or driving scale-up businesses. It's interesting to see, because I work a lot with corporations, and a lot of them actually have done some fantastic work in driving diversity, equal representation across the board. And there's still some way to be done, but I think the progress has been amazing. So I just wanted to see, what is your experience in that? Do you see similar statistics when we've discussed fundraising, for example? What's your experience?
My experience is that in the last 10 years, well, at least since I started with my initiative, a lot of things have changed. And there are more women, and there are a lot of passionate women. And it seems like a gate has been opened. That's my perception. Environments, all sorts of environments, seem more ease in having a more active interaction with women, which is great. It's useful, obviously, because it allows ideas to be protagonists, not the gender issue, which is finally really, really important. I think I can see startup businesses being quite well represented by women. It seems to me it's a very good figure. I would say I'm very, very optimistic about that, because it allows a new, very strong flow of ideas and possibly innovations to come to fruition, which I would imagine we all really need to. The figure that probably seems to still have a gap, where I also had a little bit of experience, is the scaling up fundraising figures, where actually I think I've seen a figure of 12% of women successfully scaling up those startups, which seems to me a little bit underrepresented. That's true. And that's actually a very good question to pose, why this as it is. My vision is that there might be a little bit of a legacy of a bias. It could be, especially considering that the financial sector is traditionally quite conservative for several different reasons, also in order to kind of push back on risk, and where there is no track record, the financiers could see there might be a risk. There might also be a reason that some boards that they have some decision making in their hands are still a little bit monogender. That's probably a relevant aspect as well. There are some soft elements to it. As women, we also, I would also say, although I don't know how much this is impactful, we have a slightly different way of communicating, and not saying that could be the only reason why the numbers are not the same, but it might be that sometimes we might need to enhance a little bit our self-confidence. This is something that I do recognize with myself, and actually a way of dealing with that, I guess, for me, women that really need that extra strength could be to really focus on the ideas, on the goals of the business. The determination to go forward is usually very well perceived. And I think also we are in a transitional moment. So the figure might be at 12% now, but with the mentioning you were saying of that much work being done, especially on the multinational level, on more institutionalized companies, we are seeing more diverse boards. It is very helpful. And I'm not saying just for the gender issue. Women are 50% of the population, of course. It's a very evident misrepresentation, but there are other diversity issues probably that could be beneficial to tackle within these boards. And I think in the UK, at the moment, and you will correct me if I'm wrong, but on those multinationals level, we already have a good representation of 40, if not 50% of women in board. Obviously, this change requires a little bit of time, and when it gets to decision making, which will have an impact on the scaling up, we still need a little bit more time. So personally, I'm quite optimistic. I think it would be very interesting to see what's going to happen with those numbers in 5 years' time. I really do expect an increase.
What advice, so looking specifically at your sector, because this is, of course, where you've been working throughout your career, what advice would you give to women, but all people really, who would like to advance their career in general renewable energy sector, maybe in more specifically investment and power generation development? What advice would you give to people? What skills do they have to acquire? How should they, shape their career to make some advancements? And on the other hand, what we should collectively do. So what should sector do to open up a little bit more, perhaps, or to attract more women, to attract other individuals into the sector and just benefit from the diversity of ideas and from growing of that sector, which is so important to all of us?
Yeah, well, great question. I could talk for hours, better not to. I think for those who would be interested in entering the sector, depending on which seniority we're talking about, our sector is a sector that now started really having some track record, some standards. So there are fantastic courses for the youngers at universities that are really tackling some of the main aspects of our sector. I would advise them to maybe also do a master in order to be introduced on how the sector works. And then enthusiasm is always the bigger driver in my opinion. And then you just go, and there is an incredible amount of opportunities at the moment. Really, a lot of companies that are investing and searching for people skilled, and maybe also people a little bit less skilled but willing to work in the sector. So I would say go in and exploit the opportunities. The sector that has not reached the maturity yet, and the way it is shaping is really at the moment very much based on the capability to innovate, because there are some transitional issues like the one we discussed with the grid. So definitely it's a great moment to be involved and to learn. It's not I think a sector where you have huge barriers at the entrance. Just of course, if you are a little bit more senior and you have never been exposed into this kind of environment, this kind of sector, I would advise to do maybe a small course to identify what are the drivers of the sector, and then pick which areas of the sector, more financial, more technical, more commercial. There's really a very wide range of possibilities. So go on. For those who wants to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, independently of the gender, that's not an issue really. I would say just be very clear with what you want to achieve, what is very important for you, because the entrepreneurial career is not just a profession, it's a choice of life. Which is something that you really need to take into consideration. It's an incredibly exciting ride, but you always need to stay grounded. You always need to have your goal in your mind and keep on going, very determined. It's very rare to have a very smooth path. Obviously, when the sector goes very well, it's slightly easier. But always you need to tackle a management issue. It's not just about the ideas. It's also a lot about delivery and execution. And you need to have always these two big pillars: ideas, determination, goals, and delivery and execution.
I guess you're faced with a lot of people who not necessarily believe in your ideas immediately. So you have to be very persuasive and as you said, not only be determined and believe in your ideas, but also relentless and persuasive in selling them.
Totally. It's like a roller coaster sometimes. But if you're really strong enough and you really, your desire must be strong. You really need to be sure about what you do, because you're going to find a lot of people not necessarily sharing your ideas. So you need to be able to articulate why you're doing what you're doing. And it's I think a very healthy process. The second issue is regarding the sector, right? What I would reckon it would be interesting and good to have as a support, you mean, if I properly understand. Well, a good support, in my opinion, is relating to really challenge ourselves to start looking at things slightly in a different perspective. Like, for example, in the case of the mono-gender or mono-view boards of directors that are used to continue taking decision in the way they were taking 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. Let's push ourselves a little bit more, because it's a moment of history where I believe we really need to find new solutions for problems that we are dragging on for long and we didn't solve. So this means that if we want to be very rational, the solutions that have been found so far was not good, and there was not a good delivery on that. There are still some problems. Energy is a problem. Pollution is another problem. Let's start supporting.
Think outside of the box. Yes.
A little bit more, if possible, people that are thinking out of the box independently of their gender, race, or whatever. This should really not be an issue. Ideas should talk. And if we can really make at least the effort to focus on those ideas, again, also to those who decide to invest or not, check if someone who's presenting or pitching an investment has the goals, has clear goals in front of them and are capable to deliver, and give a chance maybe to someone who maybe didn't have a track record to be supported. That's That's something that I think is key at the moment.
It's very well documented and studied, the fact that we all have implicit bias. We just have it. It's human, and this is why a lot of organizations, big corporations, for example, they make sure that interview panels are made up of a variety of people. So there's not just one bias that will determine who are you choosing, maybe for a certain role or for a certain project. So these little things help a lot, making sure that you're being interviewed by a variety of groups, that there is a process to interviewing or choosing a project in this aspect, or investing in a project that really only looks at the facts, rather than that. It eliminates the bias and any subjective kind of assessments as much as possible, and only looks at objective facts that can be compared one after another, regardless of who is presenting it. One probably method way that would be welcome, and that would yield more creativity in projects, in ideas coming into fruition.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's not just because it's ethically correct. It's because it increases the probabilities that you're going to earn more money, basically.
Precisely. It's like you said, there are problems that we haven't had answers for such a long time. So, of course, we cannot keep doing the same thing over and over. There's a famous saying about it. It's madness. Yeah. So you need new solutions for choosing projects, for investing, etc.
Yeah, I totally am for this. And and again, for renewable energy, then we all have our own personal behavior, the way we consume energy, of course. And this is a very difficult one. I mean, coming back to sustainability and renewable energy, you would be surprised how many of us, even those who are big advocates for renewable energy, have an incredibly consumeristic way of dealing with energy. We sometimes are also in a position when we want to be able to save a little bit more in energy. We can't. It's we have needs during the day. We are used to get warm at specific level of temperature. Some of our houses do not allow not to switch on the heating because they are not insulated properly. There are all these aspects where they get acknowledged that maybe as a collective or also as an individual we can kind of interact with. I'm putting myself in the category, all of us, we are in certain system, we certainly need to switch our point of view on these points as a collective in order to tackle. And we're doing it, but it requires time.
There are many points in the kind of supply chain of the energy where it can be conserved. It's not about making sure that it comes from a renewable source, but it's about making sure that it's used sustainably as well. And how houses are isolated, as you said, that can influence a lot whether we've conserved the energy or whether we've purely just wasted it. Education, I guess.
Yes, and I think, if you can allow me, the new generation is a little bit better than us.
I think so. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you, and the pleasure was completely mine, really. Thank you.
Thank you.